Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. The glass of water, the ice, hit his chest before the words even landed. Sir, we've asked you twice. This cabin is for first-class passengers only. Julian Winters sat still, drenched in cold water, while the flight attendant glared at him as if he were a trespasser. Her fingers were still curled around the empty glass. A few passengers gasped. One woman shifted uncomfortably, but no one said a word, not even him. For a moment, he just stared at the flight attendant, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Not because it was surprising, but because it wasn't. He looked down at his soaked button-up, Egyptian, cotton, hand-stitched in Milan. The darkened patch on his chest glistened under the cabin lights. His $3,000 Navy suit clung to him, stiff and wet. The plane's recycled air suddenly felt freezing. The blonde attendant straightened her uniform, clearly expecting a confrontation. But Julian gave her nothing. No anger, no curse, just silence. He turned slowly, ignoring the stares, and pressed the small silver button at his armrest. The attendant light blinked on. She scoffed and walked away. No apology, no shame, as if nothing had happened, but something had. And by the time this plane touched down, so would she and half the crew. With her, 2 hours earlier, Julian boarded the Dubatun York flight without fanfare. No limo, no entourage, no Mr. Winters, we're honored to have you. He wanted it that way. He checked in under the name J. Walker, a name his mother used to write when mailing anonymous complaints to the school board back in Texas. He always liked the way it felt. Anonymous, unassuming, invisible. The irony wasn't lost on him. Now, as CEO of one of the world's fastest-growing private airlines, Julian had every right to fly under his own name. But after quietly reading months of internal complaints, especially those involving racial bias in premium cabins, he decided to test things for himself. No press, no warning, just truth. So he boarded like anyone else. Dressed well, but not flashy. Just a quiet, black man in his late 30s. Confident posture. Wedding band. A silent look of someone used to being in control, but smart enough to let others underestimate him. They did. He hadn't even been offered water for the first 40 minutes of the flight. The man next to him, white, middle-aged, in loafers and a t-shirt, had already received 2 drinks and a meal menu. The attendant passed Julian multiple times without so much as eye contact. He gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she'd circle back. But when he pressed the service button and she still ignored him, he leaned forward and said, politely, "Excuse me, I think I was missed earlier. Could I get some water, please?" She turned, blinked like it startled her, then gave him a once-over. Her eyes flicked to the seat number, to his face, and back. "This is first class," she said. He paused. "I know, you're in the wrong section. I'll need to see your boarding pass." Julian kept his voice calm. "You can check it, but this is my assigned seat." Her expression didn't change. "I'll get a supervisor." She left, without waiting for his reply. Passengers in nearby rows had started watching now. A few pretended not to notice, heads buried in complimentary tablets and champagne. One woman met his eyes. She looked away quickly. A few minutes later, the airline's onboard supervisor arrived, older, grey suit, headset in his ear. "Sir," he said quietly, "we've had reports of a seating issue. Could I just take a quick look at your boarding pass?" Julian handed it over without a word. The man stared at it, read it again. His eyes widened. "Oh, I apologize, sir. You're in the correct seat, thank you." He handed it back, a nervous smile twitching at his lips. "Must have been a misunderstanding." Julian said nothing, but the attendant returned minutes later, this time with a plastic smile and a tall glass of water. He thought for a moment that she was about to apologize. Instead, with practiced precision, she let the glass tilt slowly, deliberately, and the ice water spilled over his chest. He didn't flinch. The cold soaked through his shirt, clung to his ribs, and settled like a warning. She dropped the empty glass into the cue folder and turned. That was the moment. Julian knew exactly how this flight would end. He unlocked his phone. There was an app on the second screen, hidden behind a fake calendar icon. Only 5 people on Earth had access to it. Inside were real-time operations protocols, security access, and an instant escalation feature that could summon emergency meetings of the company's executive board, or shut down a flight crew's employment status before they even landed. He typed in a short 6-digit code, then pressed, observe, do not interfere. Yet, Julian leaned back in his soaked seat, heart steady, breath calm. He didn't feel rage, not yet. What he felt was something colder, older, the same thing he'd felt when his guidance counselor said he should aim for trade school, not Harvard. The same thing he'd felt when a venture capitalist shook his hand, smiled at his pitch, and told his assistant later, "Don't waste our time with charity founders." The feeling of being unseen, of being doubted, of being targeted for existing in a space people didn't expect you to belong. He exhaled slowly. They had no idea who he was, but they would. Soon he should have stayed quiet. The cabin lights dimmed to soft amber as the flight cruised over the Atlantic. Most passengers had reclined into a drowsy hush, sipping wine, tapping on tablets, or adjusting their noise-cancelling headsets. But Julian Winters sat upright in seat 1A, soaked shirt clinging to his skin, his phone resting quietly on his lap, like a loaded weapon. No one had spoken to him since the incident. The blonde attendant who doused him with water, now suddenly attentive to everyone except him, the onboard supervisor, disappeared, and the rest of the first-class cabin, willfully blind. Julian wasn't just angry, he was documenting. The app he'd activated wasn't just an alert system, it was a live access feed to his internal executive operations team. They weren't watching Netflix on the other end of that line. They were watching him, watching this flight, watching every silent, racialized microaggression unfold in real time from 5,000 miles away, and they were waiting on his signal. He hadn't given it yet, but he would. He just needed one more reason. "Excuse me," a soft voice said beside him. Julian looked up. It was a woman, early 40s, South Asian glasses, neatly pinned hair. She sat across the aisle in 1B. Her tone was low, cautious, but her eyes held fire. "I saw what she did. That was deliberate," she whispered. "You should file a complaint when we land." Julian gave a small nod. "Thank you. But I won't be filing a complaint." She blinked. "Why not?" He looked her in the eye and said simply, "Because I don't complain, I correct." She stared at him for a moment, then looked away, like she understood, but also didn't want to be seen agreeing. Meanwhile, in the galley at the back of first class, the same blonde flight attendant, name tag C. Morgan, was ranting to a co-worker. "I don't care if he had a ticket," she snapped. "He boarded through economy. He didn't look like, you saw him, right?" Her colleague, a younger male attendant named Kyle, hesitated. "Maybe he didn't want to draw attention, or maybe he's just quiet. Doesn't mean he's not supposed to be here." She rolled her eyes. "Yeah, well now he's playing the victim. He's just sitting there like he's waiting for a lawsuit or something. I swear, I hate when they do that." Kyle froze. "Them." She instantly paled. "I didn't mean," he raised a brow. "I think you did." She glanced around. "Look, Kyle, I'm not racist, but there's a certain entitlement some people have these days. Like they walk in expecting royal treatment and get offended if they don't get bowed to." Kyle didn't respond. He just shook his head and walked away. She muttered under her breath, "Whatever." He should have stayed quiet. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every word she just said had been recorded. Back in 1A, Julian checked his phone. A notification blinked across the top of the screen. Live feed upload. Complete views. 3028. Internal review team notes. Escalate after next crew interaction. He opened his email app and began drafting a single message. Short, surgical. Subject: Flight 774, 2, Private Exec Channel, High Alert Body, confirm documentation, awaiting final trigger before full corrective action. Stand by. He hit send. Then he waited. It didn't take long. 20 minutes before descent, the onboard supervisor returned. His demeanor had changed. Not apologetic, but now defensive. "Mr. Winters, I've reviewed your ticket, and, yes, you're assigned to this cabin," he said, hands clasped in front of him. "But I need to address your behavior earlier." Julian raised an eyebrow. "My behavior?" "There were complaints that you were aggressive, disruptive, that you made some of our crew feel unsafe." A South Asian woman across the aisle actually gasped. Julian didn't speak. He simply turned his phone around and played the recording. The video was clear. C. Morgan's voice rang out. "He boarded through economy. I swear, I hate when they do that." Followed by her full rant. The supervisor's face drained. of color. Julian stopped the video halfway through. You were saying, he asked, voice quiet, cold. The man opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Mr. Winters, this is a very serious accusation. If this video were to surface, Julian leaned forward, voice like iron. It already has. Back at corporate headquarters in Atlanta, Julian's personal assistant, Erin, was already sending the footage to the PR and legal teams. A pre-drafted press release was being prepped with one click. Subject line: Airline CEO secretly tests company bias. What he found will shock you. But Julian didn't want public scandal yet. He wanted transformation, and it had to start with consequence. As the plane touched down at JFK, a quiet message was sent through the crew. Comes internal. Notice, effective immediately. Crew members C. Morgan and L. Reddick are to be suspended pending formal investigation. All interactions with passenger J. Winters have been logged and will be reviewed for protocol violations. Comply with all ground directives upon landing. In other words, they were done. Julian stood slowly as the wheels touched tarmac. Water had dried on his shirt in tight salt lines. He didn't bother hiding it. Passengers gathered their belongings in silence. A few glanced his way with shame in their eyes. One man whispered, "Sorry, man," but didn't make eye contact as he reached the exit. C. Morgan stood at the front, smile painted on her face like nothing had happened. "Have a great evening, sir," she said. Robotic. Julian met her gaze. "You won't be flying again." She flinched, and then he was gone, coat over his shoulder, shoes clicking against the jet bridge, walking straight into a black SUV, waiting on the tarmac. Not a word, not a backward glance. Just purpose. The world starts. Watching Julian Winters sat in the back of the black SUV, the city lights of New York streaking past the tinted windows. Traffic pulsed around him, horns blaring in the distance. His assistant, Erin, was already on the call. "They're rattled, Julian," she said. "HR's panicking. PR wants to contain it internally, but there's a problem." He didn't flinch. "Go on." The videos leaked. There was a pause, not of fear, but calculation. "How bad?" he asked. Erin hesitated. "It's not just the water. The audio from the galley, her voice, everything. It's all out, and people are furious." He glanced down at his phone. Already, over 2.3 million views. Clip title: Black CEO racially profiled in first class. What happens next is justice posted. 2 hours ago. Top comment: She poured water on him. She should never work again, ever. Second top comment: The way he kept his composure. That's power. That's class. Salute, Mr. Winters. Third comment: Imagine being so racist you humiliate your own boss and don't even know it. Julian leaned back in the leather seat, letting the noise roll through him. He hadn't leaked it, but someone on the internal review team clearly had. Maybe it was anger. Maybe someone believed the world needed to see, and maybe they were right. The question now wasn't what happened. The world had already seen it. The real question was, what would he do next? At corporate HQ the next morning, things were on fire. The airline's boardroom filled quickly. 14 directors, all shaken, all trying to process how their CEO had ended up the face of a discrimination scandal. "Julian, we need a statement," barked Marvin Blake, a gray-suited board member with 30 years under his belt. "Something neutral, apologetic. You're a victim here, that's the message." Julian didn't even blink. "I'm not playing the victim," he said. "You're not. I'm leading." Marvin exhaled. "Julian, no, Julian, cut in. For 2 years, I've read anonymous complaints about racism in our cabins. I've seen reports disappear before they hit HR desks. And the moment I become the target, then you want statements." The room went still. A younger board member, Sophia Ng, cleared her throat. "What are you proposing?" Julian stood, pacing slowly. "I don't want a press release. I want a reckoning." Later that afternoon, Julian called a press conference, not in a closed room, not in front of a velvet curtain. He walked out alone, without handlers, onto a small platform in front of the company's downtown building. Cameras clicked. Journalists shouted. He waited until they calmed. Then he said, "My name is Julian Winters. I'm the CEO of North Star Air, and last week, I was humiliated on my own airline in first class, because I didn't look like I belonged there." Gasps and murmurs rippled across the press crowd. He continued, "I did not make a scene. I did not shout. I documented. I watched. And now, You've watched too. He took a breath. I won't be firing one flight attendant, or just suspending 2 crew members. I'm announcing a complete overhaul of North Star's staff training, hiring practices, and reporting systems, effective immediately. More flashes, more shouts, and for those of you wondering, yes, I could have handled this behind closed doors. But that's the problem, isn't it? These things always stay behind closed doors. Until now, the internet exploded. Hashtag Julian Winters, hashtag Flying While Black, hashtag CEO Justice talk shows picked up the footage. Civil rights groups reached out. Airlines around the world scrambled to review their own crew conduct policies. And somewhere in a cramped apartment in Queens, C. Morgan sat alone, watching herself go viral. The emails had stopped. Her job was gone. The blonde confidence she wore so easily had cracked into silence. She stared at the screen as someone tweeted, "The face of entitlement." And it backfired beautifully. She closed her laptop and cried. But Julian's plan wasn't revenge. That had never been the goal. Not really. Revenge is a moment. Transformation is a legacy. At a private charity gala 2 nights later, Julian took the mic again. This time, not to address scandal, but to announce a new initiative, Project 1A, a multi-million-dollar program aimed at training underrepresented youth in hospitality, aviation, and corporate leadership. "We don't just need better airlines," he said. "We need better airline leaders from every background, especially those who've been told they don't belong." The room rose in standing ovation. Even some of his fiercest critics on the board, ones who had once doubted his social activism, clapped the loudest. But not everyone was cheering. In the shadows of the gala's after-party, someone from within the company made a call. Not to a journalist, not to a lawyer. To a rival airline. "There's more to that video than what the world's seen," the voice whispered. "And if you want it, I have access." The leak that could destroy everything. The morning sun had barely kissed the skyline of Manhattan when Erin burst into Julian's office. Her face was pale, her voice tight with urgency. "Someone leaked new footage," she said. Julian looked up from the conference table, where files on Project 1A were neatly spread. "Another video?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "This one wasn't meant to be seen." Julian stood slowly. "Show me." The clip wasn't long, just over a minute. It was shot from a low angle, likely a crew camera positioned above the galley for internal monitoring. The footage started moments before the blonde attendant, Morgan, poured the water. And that's where the problem was, because just seconds earlier, Julian could be seen leaning forward, saying something quietly. The audio was muffled, indistinct. But then came the voiceover, added after the fact. "CEO aggressively confronts flight attendant before viral incident," it said. Was it really racism, or retaliation? Erin paused. The clip. "It's doctored." The audio was layered in. "Your lips don't match the words." Julian didn't move, but his jaw clenched. Within hours, hashtags began to split. Hashtag Justice for Julian still trended. But now, beside it, hashtag The Full Story, hashtag Misleading Footage, hashtag CEO Confrontation. Cable news ran back-to-back panel debates. Did the public rush to judgment? Is there more to the video than we thought? Julian knew what this was. A classic smear tactic. But this time, the damage wasn't about his reputation. It was about discrediting the message. Someone wanted to muddy the waters, to make the issue go away, to turn transformation into noise. And someone inside North Star had helped them do it. That night, as Julian sat alone in his penthouse apartment, the city flickering below, his phone buzzed. No caller ID. Blocked number. Hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, distorted and calm. "You're making enemies, Winters." Julian didn't speak. People don't like a crusade. They like quiet prophets, not press conferences, not revolutions. Still, silence. Then, walk away. "Shut down Project 1A, or we bury you." Double quotes. Click. Julian stared at the screen, then calmly placed the phone on the table. He didn't flinch, but something inside him shifted. The next day, Erin tracked the breach. It came from inside, she confirmed. Someone from the AV compliance team downloaded internal footage after hours, then sent it to a media firm that's worked with your competition, Nova Sky Airlines. Julian arched a brow. Nova Sky. Guess who's one of their board advisors now? He waited. Marvin Blake. The name hit like ice water. Marvin, the old-school board member who'd begged Julian to release a neutral statement. The same man who'd once said in a meeting, "Don't make this company about race, just make us money." Julian exhaled sharply. "He's trying to tank me before the next shareholders vote." "Worse," Erin said. "He's trying to prove you're a liability to your own company." Julian didn't rage. He didn't call the press. He went quiet, which for him was always a warning sign. Instead, he booked a flight, not on North Star, on novasky.economy.middle seat. 3 hours later, he walked into the corporate tower of Novasky in Atlanta, completely unannounced. Security paused. "Him, sir. Do you have an appointment?" Julian pulled out his phone, showed them the photo, a snapshot of Marvin Blake, walking into that very building 2 days ago. Then the next, an email forwarded by an anonymous source that read, "Send the footage, we'll make sure it's seen." Just like we discussed. It was signed MB. "I do now," Julian said simply. Marvin was in a glass-walled meeting room, mid-conversation. When Julian entered, heads turned. Silence fell. Julian shut the door behind him and slid the phone across the table. "I don't need a lawsuit," he said. "I need you gone." Marvin sat stiffly. "You're bluffing." Julian pulled out a USB drive. "This has the original audio feed, with timestamp metadata. Forensic proof. The viral edit was altered. If I leak this, you're the one who's buried." Marvin's face flushed red. "You think you can strong-arm me?" Julian leaned in, voice low and precise. "I'm not here to strong-arm you. I'm here to clean house. You want to fight for control of a company that's changing. Go ahead, but do it honestly, or get out." Marvin didn't answer, but 3 days later, his quiet resignation was announced to the board. No press, no statement. Just gone. Meanwhile, the truth about the edited clip was released carefully and surgically. Julian didn't posture. He didn't gloat. He simply released the facts and let the public see for themselves. The tide turned again, even louder this time. He didn't just survive the smear, he destroyed it with silence. Julian Winters is playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. But not all wounds heal in headlines. Julian knew something had changed in him. The betrayal, the backroom threats, the weaponized media had scarred deeper than the water ever could. He stood one night at the edge of his rooftop, watching planes blink across the sky. He had once dreamed of flight, of rising. Now, he understood what flight really meant. Not escape, but resistance. Every day he stayed in the air, as a black man, as a CEO, as a force for change. He was defying gravity. The knife inside the circle. 2 weeks after the scandal seemed to die down, North Star stock was climbing again. The backlash had passed. Marvin Blake had resigned, and public opinion hailed Julian as a symbol of dignity, resilience, and reform. But, in the quiet, something darker was moving. Julian felt it first in the silence. The meetings with board members were suddenly delayed. His emails took longer to get replies. Erin noticed it too. "There's chatter," she said, one morning, standing in his glass-walled office with a folder clutched to her chest. "Some shareholders are being courted. Whispers about a leadership shift." Julian looked up from his coffee. "From who?" She hesitated. "They won't say. But I did some digging." She laid down the folder. Inside was a series of internal memos, anonymous feedback letters, and flagged board communications. At the bottom was a photo, grainy, blown up from security cam footage. It was his chief of operations, Daniel Shaw, having dinner with a hedge fund group known for corporate takeovers. Julian stared at it. "I made him coup," he said, voice flat. "I pulled him up when no one else even looked at his resume." Erin nodded slowly. "I think he's planning to force a vote. And he has allies. Allies who weren't just annoyed by Julian's reforms, but threatened by them." Julian didn't act immediately. Instead, he watched. He let Daniel move, let him become confident, visible, loud. Let him gather supporters in hushed conference rooms, behind tinted glass, in group chats that thought they were private. And then, one day, Julian invited him in. Daniel entered with a relaxed smile. He always did, young, charismatic, and charming. But there was tension in his eyes. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, casually. Julian leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "I did." He pushed a single document across the desk. Daniel glanced down. It was a resignation letter, already typed, dated, with a dotted line at the bottom. Daniel chuckled. "Bit premature, isn't it?" "No," Julian said. "It's overdue." A long silence fell between them. Daniel finally broke it. You know, when you came in, I believed in you. We all did. But you've made it personal, emotional. This isn't a non-profit. It's a company. Julian's eyes didn't leave his. You think dignity is emotional, that accountability is charity. Daniel smirked. I think you've made enemies who know how to count, and they've counted you out. Julian slid another paper across the table. This one was a timeline detailing Daniel's communications, off-book meetings, and private messages from a whistleblower within his team. Daniel's face shifted. Those meetings were recorded. Julian cut in. He stood now, walking around the desk. You didn't just try to take me down. You tried to sell this company off, piece by piece, to people who would have buried every change we made. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Julian leaned in, calm, measured. Sign the letter, or I release everything. And not just to the board, to the world. For the first time in weeks, Daniel looked afraid. He signed. That night, Erin found Julian still in his office, lights off. Only the city's glow spilling in through the glass. You did it, she said softly. Daniel's out. The board's quiet. Project 1AS launching in 2 months. You held the line. Julian didn't smile. He looked tired, not just physically, but in his bones. They keep coming, he said. Every time you think the worst is over, another one appears. Smiling, calling you brother, and holding the knife. Erin stepped closer. Then, maybe it's not about stopping them. He looked at her. Maybe it's about outlasting them, she finished. A pause, then finally, the faintest nod. The next morning, Julian walked through the North Star terminal. Not with cameras, not in a suit, just him, in jeans, with a coffee in hand. He passed passengers checking in. A little boy ran past him laughing. A woman in scrubs smiled at him faintly. She recognized him, didn't speak, just nodded. He returned it. At the gate, he stopped and looked out at the tarmac. A North Star plane was being prepped, the tail branded with the company's new logo. A rising star emerging from shadow. His star, their star. Back in the executive lounge, Erin waited with 2 new files. First file, the next 300 applicants for Project 1A, most from underrepresented communities. Incredible potential. You'll want to review. And the second, her voice lowered, a formal complaint. That woman who poured water on you, C. Morgan, has filed an ethics grievance, claims emotional distress, says the viral impact ruined her life. Julian raised a brow. She's suing? No, just pleading, asking for a statement, an apology. He took the file and flipped through. A handwritten letter sat atop the documents. It read, I never knew who you were. I never stopped to consider what I was doing. I just saw someone I didn't understand and assumed the worst. I'm sorry for the water, but more than that, I'm sorry for the way I looked at you like you didn't belong. I was wrong. He read it twice, then closed the file, and said nothing. The seat no one could steal the morning of North Star's relaunch. Julian Winter stood at the edge of Gate 17, watching the crowd gather. Banners waved gently above them, introducing Project 1A. A new flight path begins. Journalists, passengers, young aviation students, all eyes were on the polished plane behind the glass. The aircraft gleamed under the terminal lights, not just because of its new paint job, but because of what it represented. A system rebuilt, a gate widened, a future no longer gate-kept. Julian exhaled quietly. The storm had passed, not without damage, not without cost, but he was still standing. And so was the dream. That afternoon, a small private ceremony was scheduled inside one of North Star's executive lounges, not for cameras, not for the media. Just for the first 10 recipients of Project 1A, 10 young men and women, all from underserved communities. All future pilots stood in awe as Julian entered the room. He didn't arrive with a security detail or a grand speech. He just pulled up a chair and said, "Tell me where you want to fly." They spoke one by one, voices trembling, stories raw. A girl from Detroit whose father died in a plane crash when she was 6, who swore she'd one day sit in a cockpit. A boy from Johannesburg who grew up near an airstrip, watching planes, but never seeing anyone who looked like him flying them. A transgender woman from Dallas who had been rejected from 3 flight schools. Before someone finally gave her a chance, Julian listened, not as a CEO, but as someone who had once sat in the same silence, unheard, unseen, told his dreams were a bit much. He nodded slowly. "You don't owe the world gratitude," he said finally. You owe it excellence. Show them what they missed. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove you right. Later that evening, back in his office, Julian opened the envelope again, the one with the handwritten letter from Morgan, the flight attendant who had dumped the water on him, the woman who unknowingly sparked the fire that changed everything. He had read it over a dozen times by now. At first he had felt nothing but disdain, then skepticism, then strangely, sorrow, not for her, but for how small the world had made her. He picked up the phone, dialed a private HR extension. "I want to schedule a call with Morgan," he said. "Off record. No press, just me and her." The line was silent for a moment. Then, "Yes, sir." The video call began with hesitation. Morgan sat on the other end, her eyes puffy, her posture stiff. Julian offered no smile, no small talk. He simply said, "You asked for a chance to speak." Morgan took a breath. "I didn't know who you were," she said quietly, "but I don't think it matters. I treated you like you were less, because that's how the system trained me, not just to serve, but to sort, to assume. I was tired, yes, but also blind." Julian didn't interrupt. "I lost my job, my friends, my name's been dragged, and I deserved a lot of that. But, more than anything, I needed to say this. I am so sorry." Julian studied her, not to assess her sincerity, but to assess his capacity to hear it. He finally spoke. "You didn't break me, but you revealed something I had tried to ignore, that power doesn't protect us. Not really. Not when skin and silence are louder." She nodded tearfully. "I don't want my job back," she whispered. "I just want to matter again." Julian tilted his head slightly. "Then start mattering," he said. "Not through apologies, but by using whatever room you're in to see people the way you should have seen me." He ended the call without flourish. Forgiveness wasn't a gift for her. It was a release for him. The next morning, Julian boarded a flight. No fanfare, no notice. First-class seat to a new attendant, wide-eyed, approached nervously. "Mr. Winters," she said, "can I get you anything?" He smiled gently. "Just water." She returned moments later. "Cold glass, linen napkin, 2 lemon wedges." "Perfect," he said, taking it, then leaned slightly closer. "You don't know this, but this seat changed my life." The attendant looked puzzled. "This exact one?" Julian chuckled softly. "Let's just say, it taught me where I belong." She smiled politely and walked off. Julian looked out the window, watching the runway stretch toward the horizon. He'd spent years trying to earn a seat in rooms that never wanted him, but now he realized his seat had never needed permission. He wasn't just flying anymore. He was building runways. Final scene, back in the North Star terminal. A new plaque was installed above Gate 17, in honor of every dream delayed, dismissed, or denied. "May this gate never be closed again." Underneath, a quote from Julian: "They tried to serve me silence. I turned it into flight." The end.